All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking to you today. It is Monday the 10th of March. And yeah, yesterday was, I didn't realize this, was daylight savings time, I guess, right? Because we actually are now living in daylight savings time. We sprang forward from daylight standard time, And I didn't realize it was like, why are some of my clocks were different than others, because almost everything is, of course, digital and connected to the internet, connected to the atomic clock servers. But my oven clock, my oven being 40 years old now, 1985, and I don't want to replace it. I really, really don't, because it gets super hot, which is good for my pizza, and because it fits in the space. And any oven I get that could fit in that space would actually be smaller. It fits the space perfectly. That it's relatively narrow, but it's wide enough for turkey or anything else. But the space is relatively narrow, and newer ovens would be that would fit in that space would be quite a bit narrower even than this one. So I really don't want to replace it. Cannot. The parts are very difficult to find. I've had to do some repairs. I do it myself mostly if I can. I hired one guy to come over and he couldn't fix it, and I still had to pay for it. So I try to do it as much myself as possible, but I'm hoping I don't have to get a new oven anytime soon. Problem is, really, we need to redo the kitchen. It's like I said, this 45-year-old stove, 40-year-old, 1985, 40-year-old oven, 40-year-old kitchen. It was not renovated when we purchased the house. It was not updated, and we never did because we just were cheap, didn't feel like it, and it worked fine. But it needs that. So just something that I was thinking about, because my oven clock is so old. I actually have to turn off the oven at the fuse box to reset the clock, because the setting on the oven now is no longer working, shorted out somehow. But the clock still keeps time, so I have to reset it by turning the oven off completely. All right, 240-242-5646. If you want to join me, please do click subscribe. Click subscribe. And yeah, the cover or the thumbnail was kind of showing the difference between the supporters of Trump versus Harris, at least according to Harris voters, according to Democratic voters. And I thought it was kind of interesting because, we've heard for so often how Republicans are ignoramuses, and I've said it myself. I made this point. I made the point back on in the old Monterey station that that the truth was Democratic voters tended to be better educated than and less affluent. Right? I think that what was the word? The highest educated people with the lowest income tended to be Democrats. I don't think that's so true anymore. I think a lot of lower income but relatively well-educated people may just be sitting elections out. But it certainly once was the case that the highest educated people with lower incomes, think teachers, social workers, psychologists, as opposed to psychiatrists. Psychologists make quite a bit less than psychiatrists who are medical doctors, professors, especially professors of soft sciences like sociology. They tend to be Democrats. They tend to be more liberal. And the most Republican voters, the hardest right voters, tend to be wealthy, uneducated voters, people who are sort of self-made. And an example of that was my grandfather. He was a self-made man, did not have beyond about a sixth grade education, I believe, and he was a Republican. So no criticism of him, but he had the attitude, and understandably, hey, I worked really hard. I didn't have any advantages. I was able to succeed. I deserve what I've earned. My family deserves what I've earned for them, and no one should be taken away with higher taxes. That was his attitude. It's understandable. So I've made this point too, that when you're informed, when you're educated, and you don't make a ton of money, you tend to be farther to the left. And this is certainly a view that many on the left have, but they tend to now soft pedal the argument about income, because I believe actually the median income of the Democratic voter is higher than the median income of the Republican. The old argument was her voters, they're smart. We are smart. We're informed. We're caring. We're educated. And his voters, and they used to be described as ignorant, bigoted, but now you're supposed to say like sports. That's the big deal. So if only Democrats would appeal to that sports-loving cadre of Republicans, everything would be okay. At least that's what that's their story. And for now, that's their story for now, and they're sticking to it. Now, of course, I think that's a load of crap. What matters to me, and I say it never stops mattering to me, is policy. I think that's the only thing. And doing the right thing over and over and over again, especially the right thing by working people, and especially when it comes to economic justice. We'll talk about that. But before we get there, for me, probably the biggest issue, and for many, many people in this country, many, many working people, our foreign policy under the Democrats was absolutely abhorrent, was disastrous. We saw that Harris probably lost the election because she refused to renounce the unwavering support for Israel that the Harris-Biden-Blinken administration had held to. She simply said, I'm not going to break away from Israel. I'm not going to say that Israel doesn't deserve weapons that it uses to genocide. I'm not going to say that Israel doesn't deserve weapons that it uses to invade neighboring countries, like including Lebanon and Syria, that it's completely destabilized and thrown that region into chaos. I'm not going to do that. I will never break with Israel. And because she took that position, she very likely lost the election. That is Kamala Harris. And that's something that is never discussed by the Democratic elites, never mentioned. It's just we're smart, we're educated, we're informed, and they're ignorant and bigoted. Oh, oops, I'm sorry. They're sports lovers who have the right position on trans issues. That seems to be the new Democratic mantra. We'll get to that, but I really do want to center, as I have so often in the past, on this program, the Palestinian people, the much beset upon, the victimized, and I hate to call people victims and describe them that, people are far more complex than simply victims or victimizers generally. But right now, it's hard to see the people of Palestine as anything but just victims of the Israeli Jewish genocidal state. Here is Rashida Tlaib. She is really like the only brave Democrat when it comes now to standing up to Israel. Here she is.
Everyone should be concerned about this. Last night, plainclothes agents approached Mr. Khalil and his wife as they were coming back home. He's a student at Columbia University. She's 8 months pregnant. They were coming back from Iftar because it's a holy month of Ramadan. And they get approached. And at first, again, they didn't identify themselves as Homeland Security agents. They proceed to threaten the wife before they take him into custody. We're finding out that information is coming out that they were revoking his student visa. Well, guess what? He doesn't have a student visa. He's a green card holder, a legal permanent resident. Again, they proceed to engage the attorney this way. He or she asked for a warrant. They hung up on them. If you believe in constitutional rights, you understand that they're targeting this person, and everyone knows he has been very vocal against the genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And they're targeting him and refusing him constitutional rights. Who's next?
All right, so really powerful stuff by Rashida Tlaib, 100%. I'm with her. That was posted yesterday evening, I believe. 15 hours ago, it says when I clicked on it. I'm not sure if that means a couple days earlier, actually. I'm not sure exactly when she posted that. But Khalid was arrested, I believe, Friday or Saturday. And it's horrific. He's been disappeared. No one knows where he is. His lawyer has no idea. He is not a citizen, as Rashida Tlaib pointed out, but he is a permanent resident. And most courts have concluded, and I certainly share this view, that the right to free speech is not dependent on your being a citizen. You get to speak. That's part of a civilized society, is you get to speak out against injustice. And that's exactly what Mahmoud Khalil did. Now, I will be downtown. I hope I get to see you there. This will be at 4 p.m. today in downtown D.C., and we're going to be rallying for Mahmoud Khalil. He was abducted, as you can see, by DHS. The rally is today at 4 p.m., and that's over 307th Street. So if you see me there, you know who I am because of this video, this live stream that I do on this podcast. I'd really love you to come over and say hello and say hey, and let me know that you're that you watch, because that would be hugely meaningful for me. If you want to join me on the program today, 240-242-5646. I was watching a video, and I thought about playing some of it for you, but I decided not to. Chris Hedges, mainly because I don't say he rambles. It was focused, but it was relatively long, the money part of it, and I just didn't feel like playing that much of it. So I thought I'd simply paraphrase. He said, hey, listen, things have tended to get worse and worse over the past 68 years during which he's been alive, but it doesn't negate the work for justice, the work against malign evil, as he calls it. I think he used the word malignant evil. And that's, I think, what we see right here. This is so horrific. Israel is a genocidal state, and if you criticize Israel, if you take on Israel, you get arrested. And this is Trump. Okay, so I have been less critical of Trump than many others on the left, mainly because I see some areas where I actually agree with him, most particularly Ukraine, but also because I think he's been unfairly demonized for certain things he didn't do, such as Russiagate. So and finally, because the alternative is arguably, in my view, as bad, and in some areas is worse. So, I tend to be a little bit less critical of Trump. This is absolutely awful. This is not democratic. This is not democracy. This is not freedom. This is fascism. And as bad as Harris Biden were, I don't think Mahmoud Khalil would have been arrested if Harris had been elected. Now, let's not pretend that they were some kind of champions of free speech. At no time did Harris ever speak out against the repression of Palestinian voices on college campuses. At no time did she speak out in support of Julian Assange. Certainly as far as I know. These are not, the Democratic Party is not in any way an ally or a champion of free speech. And the only, as far as I could tell, and I did some research, and it's still been only a few days since Khalil was arrested, but I can't find any other Democrat, any other prominent Democrat besides Rashida Tlaib who's spoken out against the arrest of Khalil. In fact, she said in her video, she said everyone should be troubled by this. And yet no one seems to be. No one's saying that this is wrong. No one on the left. I am not hearing from them. I Googled AOC Khalil, nothing. I Googled Bernie Sanders Khalil, nothing. It was Saturday that he was arrested, by the way, so a couple days ago that Khalil was arrested. So over that period of time, the only Democrat that I'm aware of who's actually said this is wrong, our free speech rights are under attack. And for what? Because he's speaking out against genocide. He spoke out repeatedly against American support for killing little children. And for that, he's been arrested, disappeared. No one knows where his wife doesn't know. His 8-month pregnant wife doesn't know where he is. His lawyer doesn't know where he is. Yes, this is an area where Trump is arguably the worser or the greater of evils. But it's not like the Democrats aren't evil too. And their plan, their response. I looked at the New York Times, looked at the Washington Post. There's no outcry. There's no demand in Congress for an explanation from this. There's no investigation called for. This man, Khalil, has a green card. He's a permanent resident. He presumably has due process rights. You can't just lock him up and deport him. You have rights as a green card holder. And they're completely disregarded, discounted, ignored. So you would think, right, if you're a Democrat, you believe Democrats are better, right, superior, then wouldn't you expect that Democrats would speak out against this? No, I wouldn't, frankly. I wouldn't. I don't have any hope or optimism. What about people like, well, Bernie's not even a Democrat. I haven't heard him. He hasn't said a word one. He's out there in Michigan giving speeches to 10,000 people about the power of the oligarchy and how we have to stand up to it. But he can't speak out against this incredible evil being done by that self-same oligarchy. Has Senator Nina Turner, she's got a tour going on right now. Maybe she has. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be too, I'm going to look it up right now because she's been better than most. But I haven't heard anything said. But she would be the kind of person who I think would speak out against the evil of suppressing free speech, and specifically speech challenging American empire, American evil, American support for genocide. Well, Democrats may not be big on supporting, defending the free speech rights of a Palestinian permanent resident. That's not high on their list. But I'll tell you what is, at least according to the New York Times, and here's the headline, just give it to you. Ambitious Dems, ambitious. So these are the ones who want to win office, have a new game plan. Yak it up about sports. So that apparently is the way back, right? Out of the wilderness. Dems lost. Can you believe it? They lost to Trump. It must be those racist ignoramuses, those black men who weren't feeling it. Isn't that what Barack Obama said? How he described the black men who weren't voting for Harris. She wasn't getting as much support as he thought she deserved. So it must be that, well, we're not going to call them ignorant. It doesn't really help. We're not going to call them bigots. It just, it pisses people off when you do that. It's that we just haven't connected yet with them the way we need to. So let's talk sports. It must be that they're sports lovers. And I thought this was so ironic, too. This is in the New York Times, that they're trying to, follow their own advice here, or follow the Democratic advice. Look at how they describe their three. It took 3 writers, 3 whole reporters it took to do the Googling to get the story done. But they have to let you know that it's not just the politicians, the Democrats, who like to talk about sports. And this article features Josh Shapiro, the pro-genocide Pennsylvania governor. It features Kathy Hochul, the corrupt New York State governor. These are people who are reaching out, trying to talk sports. I think the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who's now sort of hitched his wagon to the anti-trans movement, talking to Charlie Kirk, I think he's mentioned as well. So you have quite a roster of prominent, ambitious Democrats who want to talk about sports rather than talk about policy, rather than talk about the problems in the Democratic Party, rather than talking about taking our country back from billionaire elites. There's and just before, obviously this is an enormous distraction. Obviously this is a way to avoid talking about what really matters to the American people when it comes to politics. Now, I'm not saying we don't care about sports. We do. Sports are important to Americans. Sports are important to everybody. I mean, they're huge. If you go to Europe, they're just as big, just sometimes different sports. So it's not like we don't care about sporting events and competition. We care tremendously. But We care when we watch sport, athletes on TV. We don't care, or we go to arenas, or we compete ourselves. Then we care. But when it comes to politicians, what we really care about and what we elect them to do is pass and enforce laws that will make life better for us. That's what we want from our politicians. So, yeah, maybe it would be interesting, intriguing to see a governor or a senator speaking about sports, but that's not what we're electing them to do. When you buy, and you know what, I was going to say buy a CD, a compact disc. Nobody buys CDs anymore. You might buy a CD at the bank, but you don't buy music, recording. When you listen to an artist, when you download an MP3 or whatever it is that however you consume music, you consume the music that speaks to you, that sounds good to you, that's meaningful to you. If you go see Taylor Swift at a concert, it's presumably, and I would say it's true for 99% of the people who go, it's presumably because, choose your reasons, you enjoy listening to her music. You are part of that culture, that group, the Swifties. This is your kind of posse. These are people that that you're connecting with through Taylor Swift's music. So you like her music and you like the vibe, you like the feel. That's why you go see Taylor Swift. You don't go to see Taylor Swift in concert, with maybe one or two exceptions, because she's dating an NFL tight end. That's really got nothing to do with why you would go see Taylor Swift perform in concert. It's irrelevant. Likewise, people don't go to Kansas City Chiefs games or cheer on Travis Kelce because he's dating Taylor Swift. Now, maybe there's a few, but it's just a little notch. It's a little, it's a little sheen on top of the crowds that go to these games. The fans of the Kansas City Chiefs and Travis Kelce like Kelce because he has been a productive football player for many years and won many games for them and performed at a very high level in sports. It has nothing to do with Taylor Swift. So it's the exact same thing with politicians. We support politicians because they do in office what we want them to do. And these Democrats aren't doing what we want them to do. And that's why they're not winning. That's why their party is losing. They may win a race here or there. They may have huge financial support. They may be able to flood the airwaves with ads. Their opponent may be even more out of touch than they are. But going to a football game, going to announce a basketball game ain't going to change the basic dynamic, which is we don't like these politicians. We don't trust them. We want something better. This is interesting. The New York Times following its own advice. So of the three reporters, Reed Epstein is a Chicago fan, except for the Cubs. Kellen Browning is a Sacramento Kings fanatic. And then Katie Gluick, I love this. This is the funniest part of all. She once won a Ford 150. So look at that. She's getting the truck driver crowd too. She's getting the pickup truck vibe going along with her baseball fandom. It's such pandering. It's so pathetic. It's a distraction for the politicians. They're distracting you from the fact that they're not doing their job, that they're taking kickbacks, bribes, doing the bidding of the billionaire elites. That's how, they try to keep you from thinking about that by going to, by broadcasting on a sports report, sports broadcast. But also, it's what the New York Times is doing. The New York Times is doing the exact same thing. Rather than tell you about how Kathy Hochul has, did her utmost not to let New York State tax congestion, and then finally she did, in the end, but took a long time to get around to that, and for a while they're delayed congestion pricing, it's been a real boon for the city because of pressure from, from well-heeled interests. Instead of telling you about that, the New York Times is going to tell you that she likes the Buffalo Bills. Instead of focusing on Gavin Newsom and his, relatively, his close ties often to for-profit healthcare, they'll tell you about how he's a Kings fan, or whatever, sports fan. So this is what the New York Times is doing just as much as politicians. And you need to be aware of it, and you need to not trust them because they're not trustworthy. They're promoting the interests of their advertisers and their top management and ownership, which isn't billionaire level, but they're wealthy, they're powerful, they're elite. They got a lot more than you'll ever have, but that's how this is how they distract you from the real issues that we're facing: endless war, incredible wealth and income inequality, a climate disaster, climate holocaust, which we're going to also get into. How disappointed I am. I'm not in that disappointed, but Jimmy Dore really kind of just lost the thread completely. And is it audience capture? Maybe. So I saw this tweet. I think it's a tweet. No, it's Facebook. By the way, X down this morning. Could not post the announcement of this program. I like to distribute it on X, so people want to watch, they can click. And X was down. So here's Corey Robin, one of my favorites. He's a pretty darn progressive former. I don't know if he's still at Brooklyn College. May have also taught at Columbia. I'm not sure. Loser Dems thinking that talking about sports will save them. You couldn't have scripted a more designed a story. Yeah, where was I? Was missing a word. You couldn't have scripted a story. Let's get that in there. More designed to press each and every one of my buttons. So I do thank Robin for putting this up and for me being able to check in. Now, he's a Facebook friend, so I could see all the comments. And this comment really, I thought, was interesting. And I did respond to it. So I want to talk about it because this goes to the whole thumbnail, right? The thumbnail, which is, hey, we're smart, we're informed, we're educated, we're caring, and Trump people are bigots, they're ignorant, and but they like sports. So that's our new thing, right? We're not going to insult them. We're going to pander to them. We're going to, and by the way, it's incredibly insulting to think, oh, those sports loving Republicans, they'll embrace us if we just pretend to like sports. They'll vote for us. It's so incredibly insulting to the voter to say, hey, the reason they don't vote for us is because we're not connecting with them on some kind of emotional level, such as in the sports world. And I pointed out how there's a guy I'm Facebook friends with who, I think I said his name, Spencer, who discounts the entire possibility. He ignores he tries to dispel the notion that voters vote based on interests, vote based on policy. It's just, Trump connects with them. It's so insulting. It treats people like they're babies. And it's not true. If you talk to voters, they'll explain to you exactly why they vote the way they do. Now, you may not agree with their votes, and sometimes the reasons may seem, insignificant or based on inaccuracies, on falsehoods. But that goes both ways. If you want to win elections, pursue policies that make life better for voters, and specifically poor, struggling, and working Americans. So, according to this poster, Harris won in a landslide among people who get their news from actual news. So, obviously, the people who watch sports, who vote for Trump, they don't get their news from actual news. They're not informed. They're ignorant. So let's figure out other ways to reach these people since they're, not interested in the news, in actual news. Again, totally condescending. And I responded because that really irritated me, that point. And my response was, let's see if I can find it here. Of course, I don't have it now. Yeah. Well, the point I made is that just as social media may have pushed certain buttons among Republican voters, I'm not really even sure what they were, the actual news media, as described in that post, right? The media that informs the Democratic voters, it told people that, Trump conspired with Russia. It told people that Israel wasn't committing genocide, that it was, responding to an attack. It told people, that is news, actual media, that Harris Biden were defending an ally, Ukraine, not simply, providing billions and billions of dollars to the military-industrial complex to destroy Ukraine. So the corporate media, the mainstream media, the actual news, whatever you want to call it, they misled people just as much as the social media that the poster there decries. And again, it goes to that issue of, well, our voters, we are smarter, we're better informed. We know what we're doing because we read actual news, ignoring the fact that actual news lies to you, misrepresent. Maybe they do it a little bit more subtly, right, than some of the, stuff you see on, some of the memes are pretty darn raw and appeal to people's clearly their worst instincts. So I'll say this, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they're a little more subtle in the way they manipulate people and dishonestly present certain positions, but they're not that subtle. They haven't been particularly subtle, and every single time Israel commits an atrocity against Palestinians that they serve up the canard that this all started on October 7th. So they're not that subtle. Their headlines were, 15 Palestinian children killed in bomb blasts rather than the Israeli military killed 15 children. But when they're talking about Hamas, it's Hamas terrorists, slaughter, rape. That's how the corporate American media reports. So it is giving a very skewed and ultimately dishonest view of the world's events and of the actions of Harris Biden. And that's why so many people who consume that particular media voted for Harris Biden. So I responded, I didn't miss your point. The terrible policies and actions of Harris Biden were glossed over, ignored, or outright lied about by mainstream media. And additionally, mainstream media never came clean about the utter falsity of the Russiagate hoax that they, meaning mainstream media, pushed so hard. That's why their consumers were much more inclined to vote for Harris. It's not because they are so wonderful, these voters, and they're so smart. It's that they are misinformed, that they're subject to propaganda, that they are being pushed in a specific direction just as much as the Trump voters were. Congratulations if you didn't fall for it. And then there's other reasons too that I don't think were down to the benefit of the Harris Biden voter. Corporate media consumers and thus Harris Biden voters are more affluent and educated and live on the coast. And they're the people who are less hurt, who suffer the least under Harris-Biden neo-lib policies. Because more educated people who are involved in white-collar jobs, in the tech world maybe, executives, professionals. Yeah, I'm not saying all of them have done so great, but have been hurt far less than offshoring, than the constant pressure on blue-collar workers to be ever more productive while their wages are stagnant. That hasn't impacted white-collar and professional workers nearly to the same degree. So the policies that Harris-Biden pursued hurt their voters relatively less than they hurt Republican voters. And the media that Harris-Biden voters consume was far more positive and covered Harris-Biden far more positively and often very dishonestly. So that's the explanation. It doesn't redound to the benefit. It's not flattering to the Harris-Biden voter in the least, nor should it be. All right, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. Yeah, this I noticed. Because I couldn't get my thing posted on X. Is Twitter down? X rebounds, it says, after thousands of reported outages. It was down at 11. That says at 9:05 a.m. Let me just give you the full slide there. So that's Chicago, right? So 9:05 a.m. is 10:05 a.m. East Coast, where I am, as of 11:30, it was down. Maybe it's back. I don't know. It's interesting. I wonder whether there's somebody's doing some effing with old Elon. Trust me, I would have zero sympathy. None. Zero, none. Oh, Bernie Sanders. He's out. Now, I have gotten involved with a group called Workers Strike Back. I was out there in Seattle a couple of weeks ago. This is an anti-democratic, anti-Republican, pro-worker, anti-oligarch, pro-peace group. That's what we're focused on more than anything else, is trying to improve the quality of life for working Americans and focus on economic justice, economic rights. Now, there's some issues with the group. I'm not 100% on board with them or any other group, and I'm sure no one is. But on balance, I really like them. There has been a lot of we had a meeting yesterday, a Zoom meeting. There was a lot of criticism on that meeting of Bernie Sanders and AOC, criticism which I joined in. And this tour that Bernie is currently engaged in is a big reason for this. So today's the 10th. This was Saturday. This is the same day, by the way, that Mahmoud Khalil was arrested. And you didn't hear anything from Bernie. As far as I know, probably the rally may have predated or, preceded the arrest. And even if it didn't, Bernie may not have been aware of it, but he hasn't issued any statements. This really frustrates a lot of us. He's holding these rallies on behalf of the Democratic Party. He's not even a Democrat. But he's presenting the case that the problem is the Republicans, rather than the problem is the duopoly. It's both parties. And Bernie knows better. He absolutely knows, but he's just not going to take on the Democratic Party. He won't do it. And what I find doubly frustrating is there's so many people who don't get this, who don't recognize how bad Bernie's actually, how he's actually hurting the movement at this point. He's hurting the progressive movement. He's helping the oligarchy because he's distracting us from the real villains, which is the billionaire class that controls direction of both parties. Bernie isn't really a pro-peace guy either, right? He's never really come out, not lately. He was a little better on Israel than certainly Hillary. And every now and then he did push for a ceasefire resolution. He did push to stop supplying Israel with weapons. So less bad. But he never made this a cause célèbre. He never went, and he still doesn't say, no, we have to break away from the military industrial complex. The Democrats must break free. He never did that. Whatever he may say that sounds good, he ultimately has supported pro-war Democrats. And completely, without reservation, without equivocation, unwaveringly. So this is so disappointing. 10,000 supporters of Warren. I thought, is he talking about, is this 2020? Is that Elizabeth Warren? Why would he be supporting Elizabeth Warren? No, it's Warren, Michigan. Fight the oligarchy rally. And there's some interesting aspects to it. And that, again, I think exposed Bernie as not a true ally on the left, not a working person's ally. So he, again, attacks Trump as some kind of a, sui generis. We've never seen the likes of Trump before. And in some ways, that's true. But the way Bernie describes Trump, he's not unique. In this area, we're up against a phenomenon we've never seen, and that is the big lie. The big lie is not just stretching the truth. The big lie is not just fibbing. The big lie is creating a parallel universe, a set of ideas that have no basis in reality. So how about the big lie that Trump conspired with Putin? How about impeaching him for that? That was just the complete focus. That's what the Democratic Party spent 3-4 years doing. Trump is a Putin puppet. Trump conspired with Putin. Putin has something on Trump. That's why there's a P tape, right? They never were willing to acknowledge the inherent falsity in that argument. Or Hillary Clinton is an ally of working people. There's so many big lies that the Democratic Party is responsible for. We're the party that will address the climate catastrophe. Even after Joe Biden broke the record for most oil produced by any president in one 4-year term. But we're the party that will address the climate catastrophe, the climate holocaust. The idea that somehow Trump and the Republicans are the only ones living in some alternative reality is ridiculous. It's absurd. And for Bernie to promote that is very, very upsetting. And you can see more of this. So Sean Fain, the president of the Teamsters, of the UAW, there's Sean Fain and there's Sean O. Who's the one who's there's the Teamsters and the UAW, United Auto Workers. So Fain is the Teamsters and UAW is the other Sean, I don't know, Sean something or other. We talked about him the other day. He's the one who said that he was very, very critical of Harris, that she just expected, that's the Teamsters president, that she just expected that Sean O'Brien, right? Sean Fain, sorry. Sean O'Brien, president of the Teamsters, said that Harris just expected, she assumed she would get the support of the Teamsters, even though 2/3 of the Teamsters didn't want her to be president. Sean Fain, president of UAW, he has some true progressive chops. He's out there with... Now, my question to both of them is, why aren't you helping build the Green Party? Why aren't you helping, if not the Greens, why aren't you supporting a true workers' party? Because you're on the billionaire side. You're at a rally where the only solution you're promoting, the whole point of this rally was to try to get voters in purple districts. This whole tour that Bernie's doing, the Fight Oligarchy tour, is about rallying voters in purple districts that went red in the last cycle to turn out their Republican Congress member and vote in a Democrat. Not to vote in a Green, not to vote for a true progressive, not to vote for somebody who's going to be all for Medicare for all, for taxing the rich. Not any of that. Don't know. We're only in this to defeat Republicans, period, and elect Democrats. So when you do that, you're making the situation worse. You're not providing, because both parties make the situation worse, you're not providing a true alternative that will make life better for poor, struggling, working people. You're putting them, you're whipsawing them between two enemies, between two monstrous, evil kings. Here is the leader of the Democratic Party that Sean Fain and Bernie Sanders are trying to empower, trying to give him more influence. The leader of the party, which Sean Fain said, he told the voters of that party, billionaires don't have a right to exist.
There are a lot of good billionaires out there that have been with Democrats who share our values, and we will take their money, but we're not taking money from.
So I would say to you, Sean Fain, why are you caping for that guy? Why are you pushing for candidates who will, be loyal to him, who he supports, who he will help fund? Why are you out there promoting his agenda? You say billionaires don't have a right to exist. He just said there are good billionaires out there that we support. This is the opportunity. Americans are so sick and so disgusted by both parties, and rightly so, and with complete justness. We need powerful, influential people like Bernie, like Sean Fain, like AOC to lead us away from the duopoly. And instead, they keep pushing us back into it. They keep insisting that those are our only choices. That makes things worse. That makes it harder for us to solve our problems. Okay, so I don't know how I feel about Jimmy Dore right now. I really don't. There's a phenomenon called audience capture, which I think Kyle Klinsky talks a lot about. It's used very pejoratively, right? They're telling, when they disagree with someone, like we went after Cenk Uygur, because Cenk acknowledged that some of the populism on the right was understandable, that they weren't all just evil monsters on the right. And the argument was, well, he's been captured by his audience, which was strange because Cenk's audience is very liberal. They're not the populists. They're not the working people who are demanding a break from the Democrat Party. So it's hard to see how Cenk was captured by his audience. But I think some of the people who criticized him, the Sam Cedars, the Pac-Mans, they probably are captured by their audience, but they probably also believe what their audience wants them, to say, which is, isn't this awful? Cenk is no longer a Democrat. He's now a Trump apologist. That's what Pac-Man and Cedars' audience probably want them to say, so they're saying it. I don't know. Jimmy Dore was, I won't call him he's not a hero. He was never a hero of mine, but he was somebody I admired. Built up this awesome YouTube channel from nothing. And he did it by truly speaking the truth, by pointing out over and over and over in ways you could not fail to understand just how terribly corrupt the Democrats are, just how bad, how they're not on your side any more than Republicans. And, he's champion. He was there for AOC. When she first ran in 2018, he had her on his show. He supported her. And then she totally dropped him. He was 100% right about force the vote. That was such a great idea. That was completely, 86 by the Democrats, the Democratic establishment, by Democratic shills in the media. They all just went after Jimmy. And they used Jimmy to attack force the vote. So I had great admiration for all of what Jimmy Dore was doing. But, his harsh and understandable and justifiable criticism of the Democratic Party made some Republican voters that I disagree with on a lot of issues sympathetic to Jimmy. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You take your viewers, your supporters, your audience, wherever you can find them. There's nothing wrong with the fact, Jimmy was critical of certain, and I mentioned the trans community. I'll bring them back into this for a moment. Jimmy was critical of some of the trans movement views, and I think he had a point. I think he's right about, for example, trans people in sports. That's a problem. He's gone a little too far with it, though. He's definitely gone too far. But when it comes to simply trans girls and women in female sports, I agree with him 100%. That's a problem. And I don't know that there was any audience capture there. I'm sure he believes that. But at some point, he started, I believe, going farther and farther with some of these more conservative tropes, and that resulted in gave him a positive feedback loop with some Republican and some conservative viewers and listeners. Now, I never do that. When I had on early in one of my most popular programs ever was with Hollywood. She's a writer. Now I can't remember her name. She was a big Hillary Clinton supporter. Then she became a Trumper. This is terrible. I don't recall her name, but I had her on and we talked quite a bit about how the media was unfair to Trump, how the media claimed there was a Russiagate and it was just a hoax, and a lot of the coverage of him was not accurate. And then I said, but some of it really is. And then she asked me, well, what, quizzically, like she didn't believe it. Well, what has Trump done or said that you don't like? Where is there a problem? So I said, well, January 6th. That was really bad. Denying the election results, claiming that he really won. That's not true. He didn't win. That was a lie. And it was very harmful. It was very destructive to our democracy. So, that was a big issue, of course. And because I said that, the people that had watched the video, who she had brought over, started writing really negative stuff and criticizing what I had to say. And I clearly lost them. They weren't interested in any more that I would talk about. Now, if I had said, oh, yeah, Trump, well, I don't know if he really won, but there was a lot of shenanigans going on. And, there was something wrong there. And I don't blame him. If I had said something like that and tried to finesse it, I'm sure some of those Trump people would have stayed with me. And that would be what you'd call audience capture if I didn't really believe it. But I'm not going to ever do that. The one thing I will never do is change my message to suit viewers, to suit listeners. I know talking about carbon tax, fossil fuels tax pisses people off. I know my talk about tariffs isn't always welcome. And workers strike back. They oppose tariffs. They're just wrong. But I'm not going to change my opinion on that because Some people may not like what I have to say, even some of my audience. I know a lot of people didn't want to hear me talk about Israel's genocide every day, but that's the most important thing in the world to me. And it's not, and I think it's legitimately the most important thing in the world. So audience will not change what I say, what I do, what I believe. I don't know whether this nonsense that Jimmy's spewing here, along with Matt Taibbi, and I don't know, Matt Taibbi is obviously a very good writer. And Matt Taibbi does a lot of really good investigative work. I don't know if he's the smartest. I just don't know. I don't get the sense that he's the brightest bulb in the drawer. Maybe I'm wrong. He's not real articulate. I just don't get that this guy is a real deep thinker. Here's Jimmy.
So, so I'm sure you can buy off a climate scientist just as easily, right? And so are you not?
So he says because what he's talking about there is how the COVID science was the product of corruption. And there's truth to that because the COVID lab was funded, I believe, I'm pretty certain there was a lot of pharmaceutical funding. So a lot of money, millions of dollars went into those labs and into the testing because it was, the goal, the hope of the funders was, and the scientists that they were funding knew this, was you're going to come up with some marketable profit center drugs for us. So it wasn't, the goal ultimately wasn't, there may have been an alignment with those who care about public health, because if you find cures to diseases, you can make a lot of money. But it also depends on the disease. Is this a disease that rich people get? Then you can make billions. Is this a disease that only poor people get? Maybe not. Or maybe we can make money by marketing, Ozempic to obese working class people and take what little money they have left from them, while we're also pushing foods at them that make them fat. Although apparently Ozempic actually just takes away your appetite. So that's an interesting fight between two arms of the true, the capitalist state, but not just capitalist, rapacious capitalist state. The drug for profit manufacturers who make Ozempic and the fast food, quote, food industry, which is profits from making you fat and unhealthy and taking advantage of addiction to sweets and fatty foods. So there is a lot of money on the side of these investigations, these drug, these pharmaceutical testing, and that's and Jimmy is saying, hey, these scientists can be bought off by that big pharma money. He's saying, I'm sure there's plenty of money on the same when it comes to climate science. No, that's just flat out not true. All the money in climate science comes from the fossil fuel industry. That's profiting from burning fossil fuels. Their entire incentive, all the structure in climate science, is to discredit any talk of the climate holocaust caused by fossil fuel burning. There isn't a big incentive on the side of clean, green energy. Now, I guess you could say, yeah, maybe the wind and the solar people, maybe Elon, because he makes electric cars. But for 50 years, we have seen the oil and gas industry spend billions and billions of dollars promoting the lie that burning fossil fuels doesn't cause the planet to heat up dangerously, hasn't caused it to heat up dangerously, isn't why we're in the 6th grade extinction, which they deny and don't want you to even think about. So Jimmy's just flat out wrong. He's just, at this point, really become a conspiracy theorist where he doesn't believe anything that he hears, reads, or sees from anyone that he considers an elite, from anyone who's educated. Of course, there are huge problems with for-profit healthcare. That doesn't even mean, though, that we haven't benefited from for-profit. There are benefits. Probably COVID would have been far more deadly. I've read a lot of studies, and I'm convinced that although the benefits of the vaccines have been overstated, that lockdowns were probably too aggressive, nevertheless, the death count would have been far higher if there hadn't been quarantines, if there hadn't been isolation. Was it done in a fair way? Was it done in a way that reduced wealth and income? The harm that was done to poor, struggling working people? Often no. Sometimes yes, but often no. But that doesn't mean that every single study coming out of NIH, despite the obvious corruption in NIH, doesn't mean every single study is false. Every result that they provide, every data point is BS. It's not true. But yeah, you should be skeptical. You should be far less skeptical of climate science that isn't funded by the fossil fuel industry, because all the money is coming from the polluters. Jimmy's just completely wrong about this, and it's very, very upsetting.
Skeptical now, because all the predictions that people like Al Gore and
look at Tybee nodding. All the predictions that Al Gore and who else?
They keep screaming at the top of their lungs how serious this is and how there's not going to be any ice in the Arctic and all that.
Well, there isn't. There wasn't. We had Arctic. We had summer ice-free summers in the Arctic. It's not if anything. The predictions by climate scientists have consistently understated the rate of warming. So he's just wrong. And what he should be doing is talking to some climate scientists, but he won't do that.
And the coral reefs. And now the coral reefs are bigger than ever.
All right, that's not true. He just said the coral reefs are bigger than ever. So I thought I'd look that up because, I want to understand this. So Jimmy Dore says it's really upsetting because here's somebody, again, big audience, a lot of influence, audience capture. This is what his audience wants to hear. His audience people don't want to hear the planet is coming to an end, that we're rapidly destroying it. I understand that. You'd rather believe, hey, I can keep burning my car. I can keep driving my gas guzzler, and it doesn't matter. You want to believe that. It's awfully depressing to think about, oh yeah, I just had a kid 2 years ago. My child is 2.5 years old. And then to think I brought them onto a dying planet, right? People don't want to think that way. It's really painful. So Jimmy's not telling them what they don't want to hear. But the truth is the truth. The truth is it just keeps getting hotter and hotter because we keep burning fossil fuels. Both parties are responsible for that. And no, projections have not understated the rise. And no, the coral reefs aren't bigger than ever.
Other predictions have come through, and none of those people who claim to who are screaming the loudest about climate change ever call for the reduction in the biggest carbon emitter in the world, which is the U.S. military.
Right, so he's got a point here. This is true. A lot of politicians pay lip service to the climate catastrophe. They don't promote real solutions. They talk about, as Kamala Harris did, oh, well, we can still grow the economy while we have fracking, and we can still have a Green New Deal and all this, which is just false. It's just a lie. So he's got a point. A lot of these politicians are hypocrites and phonies. So what? That doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean that ultimately burning fossil fuels, the science is absolutely clear. When you inject more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, it acts as a blanket over the earth. Less, it allows the sun's radiation to come in, the rays of the sun come in, but the heat that's generated by the radiant doesn't escape as quickly. It's just science.
Bases around the world. When John Kerry and Al Gore says we have to shut down 800 military bases because climate change is that serious, I'll believe them.
Well, they should be saying that. But again, that's an absurd take. He's just flat out wrong. The fact that Kerry and Gore, especially Kerry, well, I actually think Kerry and Gore were better than the current crop of Democrats when they ran. And Al Gore might well have been persuaded to reduce the military budget. I made the case that despite Trump being a denialist, in 2016, there was at least a fair argument, a legit argument, that Hillary would be worse because Trump was not a free trader, and free trade is so bad for the environment. The fact that these people do or don't claim to believe in the climate catastrophe has no bearing on its reality. It's real, it's happening. Jimmy made the case, makes the argument. Remember, he said the coral reefs are larger than ever. That is what he said. So I looked that up. I wanted to, because I don't know, maybe it is. I've heard this. I've heard the coral reefs are kind of out of the woods. They're not in as bad shape as they were a few years ago when a lot of marine biologists were sounding their death knell. So I found this article in Oceanus, or Oceanus, I don't know. I think they should change. I wouldn't put anus in my name if I were the journal of our ocean planet, but whatever, it's fine. So this is from a couple years ago, 2 years ago, and they talk about what Jimmy just brought up. And the question, are they still on it? So Jimmy says they're bigger than ever. Okay, highest level across highest levels of coral cover across 2/3 of the Great Barrier Reef in over 36 years. So not greatest ever. The coral reefs have been in decline for many decades, for over 40 years, well over 40 years. And now there's more cover, over 2/3, than there has been in 36 years, but not more than ever, not even close. So after recent massive bleaching impacted nearly 90% of the corals, and remember that bleaching has been a process underway for a long time. Seems that anyone could see this news as a victory. So why aren't they celebrating? So they're saying, yeah, this is good, but the reef threat is not gone. It's not like, oh, it just isn't true. It is true. The reefs are under threat. It's just not as bad. Heat waves, pollution, and this starfish delivered sucker punch after sucker punch. And half had disappeared in the last few decades. So again, there's been a tremendous loss over the decades. And now, or at least as of 23, much of it was back. Not all of it, not the most ever, despite what Jimmy said. And there was projections that it was all going to disappear. But it appears that in a couple of years later, 22, 3 years ago now, the reef started growing. The biology, the life on the reef started to grow. It was coming back. That was because the super hot heat waves in that area. Now we've seen it get even hotter since 22, hotter and hotter and hotter, because we keep burning fossil fuels more and more as a species on this planet. But the water in that area, that one region, due to microclimate, La Nina effect, it wasn't so hot. It cooled off a little bit. And as a result, the reef did begin to recover, or at least see more life. It briefly broke, opening a small but significant window for some species to reclaim territory. So that's really interesting and really important. Nature abhors a vacuum. When human activities disrupt drastically ecology, niches, when human activity vastly disrupts that, lots of species are killed, lots of organisms are killed. The disruption does a tremendous amount of damage. But then there's a vacuum. There's room for new species or older species to move back in. And if the disruption ends, then it's quickly going to crowd back. And that's what happened here. Doesn't mean that there isn't still a problem, because we keep making the planet hotter and hotter. And the point that's made that Jimmy, of course, I don't know that maybe he just doesn't understand this. Maybe he's not smart enough to. I don't know. He doesn't care to. His audience doesn't want to hear it. But this is really important. A big percentage of that increased observed life on that Great Barrier Reef is one particular coral, which is described as a weedy, fast-growing coral called Acropora. And those particular corals, although prolific, are easily broken up by cyclones. They're not like, they don't have those deep roots that grasps into the rocks, find their niches, and can't be pulled off. And so they're easily exposed by cyclones, and they're also a favorite food for those starfish. And the water continues to warm. Those starfish like hotter water. So this is hardly great news. And one other point, we've reduced the biodiversity there. It's this one, these one sort of niche type of corals that, or this group of niche corals called Acropora. It's sort of like you could go out to a dairy, right, or a ranch in Texas, and there might be like 100 or 1,000 cattle on that ranch, and each cow weighs like 1,500 pounds or a ton, whatever. The steers weigh a little more. I'm not sure how much those things weigh. So the total biomass on that field might be greater than it's ever been, or at least since there were bison wandering on it. So you say, hey, look, we've got more life than ever. We've got all those cows. So we've got more biomass. But it's BS, it's contrived. It's one particular species that humans bred for our own use. It doesn't reflect a richer, more complex, healthier world. And that's exactly what we're seeing in that report of the Great Barrier Reef. So again, Jimmy, wrong. Very, very wrong. And it's disappointing, it's disheartening, because he's somebody who has in the past been very legit in his criticism of the Democrats. But here, he totally messes up. And I'll end by saying that's why you should watch Halitics. That's why you should subscribe now to Halitics, because that won't happen. I'm not going to get these things wrong. I'm not going to just go half-cocked and start embracing crazy notions that the elites, that the billionaire elites, that the capitalist class wants you to believe, but that are clearly false. So that's why you should subscribe to Halitics. You should like this video, and you should also join us on Halitics on Facebook if you haven't yet done so, where you can get more and more and more. All right, that is going to do it for me. Enjoy the rest of your day. I will be back tomorrow with Arlen. I missed Arlen today. I was so sorry it wasn't a Monday Arlen, because it is easier for me when Arlen's on, for sure. But we'll talk a little bit about Gavin Newsom. We'll talk about the Democrats with Arlen, get his take. That's tomorrow on Halitics.